Oh my God, this is very exciting. We're going to do the last panel of the afternoon. This is the new feature of this event, of this Foresighting Forum, which is the Consumer Voices panel. And I just want to welcome everyone who's part of this panel today. Dale Hollis from the Bundaberg Regional Irrigators Group. We've got Rebecca Law from the South Australian Council of Social Services. Simon Moore, Business New South Wales. And Georgia Robenstone from Financial Counselling Victoria. Thank you so much. We're going to have a little chat. Whoa. All right, so there's been a lot of talk about consumers today and putting them at the centre of everything. What does that actually mean? People keep saying we want consumers to be in the middle, we want consumer-focused this. As a journalist, I tend to get a little bit upset sometimes when people use buzzwords, but what does that actually mean in practice? I feel like, Rebecca?
That's amazing. We must be on the same wavelength, because I think that's the first note that I wrote down today.
Well, look, I'm not saying I had help.
Not saying, or maybe you were on the sidelines as I did my video.
I didn't see it personally, but I was aware of what you said in that video.
Oh, this is pre-planned, but not
behind the
like
curtain.
Completely, obviously. Well, you know, I think around interrogating consumers at the heart, firstly, it's good to reflect that we're here now on that journey where, 10 years ago, consumers were very much at the end of the chain, as in receiving energy, and that's it, you're acted upon. And now we've got things like AER having consumer vulnerability strategies, we've got, consumer as at the heart parroted, within people's corporate strategies and whatever. I do think that there's a risk that it becomes, a little bit nebulous about what we mean about consumer. And, for me, I think what we need to keep reflecting and challenging ourselves with is understanding the diversity of consumer experiences.
It's not enough, is it, to say there are renters?
Correct.
What kind of renter are?
Correct. And I don't think it's actually helpful thinking from a diversity perspective to then just pass it out into segments or groups either. And so I've been pondering this in my mind about, well, how do you approach it from a genuine position? And for me, it comes to a least harm principle and about designing policy where, people in this room, very smart people, actually have a lot of power in the policies and programs that we put in place. We have a lot of power to do harm and a lot of power to be detrimental. And I think, Rick, a lot of the work that you've commented on, prime example being robo-debt, about a policy that is willfully harmful, right? And so for me, it's about making sure consumers at the heart, you're covering off that, lowest basic sort of base around a fail-safe, or, making sure that if we go down this route with smart metering or, for example, time of use tariffs, this person, you're not making someone's life worse or adding to their stress. Because certainly when we talk to people, I don't think that necessarily they think about energy as much as we do.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like pulling yourself out of the cycle, right? And you're like, we're all here probably because we have an interest in energy, or consumers, or both, hopefully. And
raise your hand if you're interested in neither of those things.
And, I think, when the policy that you've worked really hard on to put in place then ends up being an act of harm on someone's life, you've actually made it worse. So for me, I pull back from consumer, which is not the best word either, to a person,
Yeah, we love to call people customers or consumers.
Yeah,
I kind of balk at that. Georgia, I'm interested in your view as, from the financial counselling point of view, but I grew up in a impoverished household. There weren't a lot of active choices being made. Are people that you talk to, beyond saying I can't pay my bill or I'm having trouble paying my bill, are they actually actively thinking about decisions they could make with their energy costs?
I don't want to generalise, but a lot of people are not thinking about that because they've got much bigger things to think about. We find... So I'm from Financial Counselling Victoria. We're the peak body in Victoria for financial counsellors, but obviously there financial counsellors elsewhere in the country too. And generally, people's first priority is housing, and the second priority is energy. And keeping the lights on might mean going without food, medication, healthcare, social life. We have data on that, and it's pretty devastating, really. And we've spoken about people going without heating and cooling as well, and like for a lot of people who struggle to pay their bills, their consumption is already much lower than the average household. So I find it frustrating when people give people in energy hardship advice about, turn the lights off at this time. It's like, that's not the problem.
It's like all those great articles in the Sydney Morning Herald about how to save for your first home. It's like, just get a loan from your parents and then talk about it later. I'm like, that's not helpful.
But yeah, I think it's worth saying also that vulnerability, like in relation to energy, and I think this came up before with the difference between poverty and energy poverty, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and like income support is inadequate, and that's a big part of the picture. So yeah, I think people are just thinking like day to day, how do I get by?
I'm interested in that because there is always a failure to see things fully when you don't fully understand the other person, and we'll get more into that later. But Simon, from a business point of view, that's also the case in terms of not understanding that businesses have to make investment decisions over a long horizon, but they might not be there in 10 years. And so how do they plan for that future with energy costs?
Yeah, I think that's right. You have, as with all the other sectors of society that have been talked about, a huge diversity within the small business community. You get asked a lot of questions as a representative, what does small business think? But I'm always wary of any sentence that begins, small businesses think X, because they think all sorts of different things. Each business thinks something different. The prospects that different small businesses have, their ability to engage with some of these questions about what the future of energy looks like, are very different. Some are stable enough, informed enough that they are thinking about those questions of, okay, how do I really get on with a net zero economy? What structural changes can I invest in my business over the next few years so that I'm ready for that world? But there are some who don't necessarily know where their next check is coming from, their next contract is coming from. For them, these kind of conversations that have sort of slightly hazy views of the post-2030 world where energy will be cheap and abundant, it's not real. What's real is that bills are going up by thousands of dollars right now. People are not clear that energy supplies are going to be stable and secure over the next few years. And those are the things that are really concentrating some of their minds.
That was always the thing that I found most difficult. I wrote about it in my first book, actually, in terms of mum worrying about energy costs growing up, and about whether renewables would be, whether you knew the answer to or not, whether renewables would actually help. And someone left a review. I don't read all my reviews. I don't get upset about them. But someone left a review saying, "What are you, a climate change denier?" And I was like, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" Sorry, I shouldn't swear. ECA, it's a family venue. But I'm interested in that kind of, because I still don't know the answer, to be quite honest. As someone who tends to read about these things and I try to pay attention to policy and development, I don't actually know, in terms of the bill split, whether renewables, they're cheaper to produce, I know that, but is it the network cost and all of these other things? So Dal, I'm interested in your point of view from regional Queensland, and a fellow brethren from up north. What do you make of these discussions about the transition we're in now and the promises or otherwise?
Yeah, I guess I'm from a little village, little village called Bundaberg. Some of you might know one of the drinks that we manufacture up there.
I know it very well.
It's a wonderful product called ginger beer. So, strangely enough, Bundaberg ginger beer is being exported to the world now. Pepsi Cola did a contract to buy it and have it manufactured in America, and the owners of the company said, no, it gets made in Bundaberg. So we have this huge building going up. I guess the reason why I've dumbed it down to this level is I represent the irrigators group in Bundaberg. I'm also a farmer and an irrigator in my own right. And in about 2008, I noticed that my power bill was starting to go up and be stupid. So we got on busy and had a look at a few things. I really don't care where the electrons come from. The transition, and I think this is a comment I'll make to Energy Consumers Australia. Transition's one thing, but Energy Consumers Australia a couple of years ago identified the role of grid-supplied electricity as providing comfortable homes and viable businesses. And to do that, we needed tariffs that were firstly and most importantly affordable. Secondly, optimised, so we could actually change tariffs and get tariffs that suited our own lifestyles, our own business views, and the other thing was individualised. So when I look at it from an irrigator's perspective in Bundaberg, we carry Bundaberg. Bundaberg's economy is worth about $8 billion, regional economy. In that economy, about 1.3 comes directly from irrigated agriculture. Another 700,000 comes from things like Bundaberg rum, Bundaberg ginger beer, the Polish people who do the chilies. There is an inordinate amount of value adding. But I guess what really affects us is what we call the water energy nexus, because we need to be able to put the water onto the crops to grow it. I hate the term efficiency, because being efficient, you just turn the power off and you're very efficient, but you're not productive. And one of the big things that I think as we transition, we've got to look for productivity and energy productivity in particular. And we have to nail a few things on the wall. And Virginia will smile now because I'm about to mention my 8 cents and 8 cents. About 2 or 6 years ago, we actually sat down and looked at the cost of renewables, and wind and solar and everything else that went in, and coal, everything in Australia. And we thought, as a retailer, they should be able to supply energy with a reasonable rate of return to the retailer at 8 cents a kilowatt. And then we looked at the network and we thought, well, even Ergon, which apparently is the biggest network in the world, should be able to do 8 cents. So we put an affordable definition of an affordable price on the wall as a ceiling of 16 cents.
How did you come up with that price?
Well, at the time, wind was about 3 cents a kilowatt, solar was around about 4, coal was 2.5. I realise coal's gone up now. The network prices, when you drill down into Ergon's actual network prices in the latest tariff structure statement, majority of them are under the 8 cents, so it is doable. I think where we get a lot of complexity is in the affordability side of the thing. We've got AMC, we've got, and this is my personal view, and I might be a bit controversial. I think if you were inventing a machine to gouge money out of consumers, you couldn't look further past the national electricity market and how that operates. So,
Bless you, Dale. Look, I like a little bit of conflict on the panel. And conflict must be answered. So I'm going to go back. I'm not doing this deliberately in order, but I want to go back to Rebecca, because we're talking not just about equity now, but there is also the generational equity issue, which is, it's the other thing I try to wrap my head around, because I want there to be a livable planet, for example, and there's no real discussions about affordability if you're burning up. So how does that factor into the day-to-day living costs of people who are struggling?
Great question, Rick. I do want to respond to the 8 and 8. In Chinese mythology, 8 is very lucky, and so 8, you're laughing.
We just solved it. We solved energy.
So yeah, we can chat later on marketing strategies. Back to the question. I think it is the perennial question, and I don't think we're very mature yet in discussing intergenerational equity. I think we pay lip service to it, and it has to be a balance, but I think it might be used in some instances as an external factor, maybe something that's outside in the island, to bring forward investment. You know, it's just like, oh, we don't want to leave it until the future when things are real bad, and not only Ukraine's in war with Russia, China's there as well, and whatever. We don't want to delay. And so, look, I think it needs to be again bringing consumer voices back into that conversation, and who's best placed not only to make those decisions, but who's best placed to bear the risks of things going wrong as well. And then so affordability, whether you're paying more now and struggling real right now, and I feel, George and the people that we talk to, like they're struggling right now, and so we can't even think about the future with, the views of we have this stewardship over, this planet that we live in as well. So, I think I just talked around in circles and didn't give an answer, but, there are thoughts in amongst there.
Plato loved circles, so we're doing okay. I'll jump back to you in a bit, Georgia, but Simon, I'm not putting words in your mouth, or I'm not trying to verbal you, but I'm trying to imagine sometimes these discussions feel a little wishy-washy, where, even I find myself going, oh God, we're talking about intergenerational stuff, but we've got problems now. Does that kind of framing annoy you, or do you think that there are people out there, well-meaning people, talking about the future when really we're missing a few key things now?
I wouldn't say it annoys me. I think through the different presentations we've heard today, this is one of the themes that ties them together. We heard in the morning presentation about the desire for a plan, that what people really want is to have a concrete sense of where we're going and what the steps that get us from here to there are going to be. And then the last presentation before this one was about uncertainty and about all the things that can screw up those plans, no matter how intelligently thought out and best laid they are. And that's really at the heart of the challenge.
But isn't that okay, that we don't know where we're going and are we getting upset about nothing?
Well, I think it's okay in the sense that you can't predict the future with perfect foresight. That much is clear. And so if you have that structure that has the kinds of things that we look for, responsiveness, adaptability, the ability to, move towards options that become more attractive as they become visible, that can still happen within a structure and something that gets us close enough to a plan to be something that people can latch on to. In terms of what that means for businesses thinking about investments, I think plenty of them understand what the big drivers are going to be, the kind of the big factors that are motivating decision making. Move to net zero is the most obvious one, that is coming not just from government pressure, but from supply chain pressure, the people that they're selling their goods or services to. But things can take them by surprise as well. We've seen over the past year what the impact of one Russian gentleman's decision can have on some businesses very far away.
Gentleman's a generous description,
right.
but yeah, you're a very nice person.
Not that gentle. So these things can surprise, and to the extent that businesses can adapt to those things, the advice that we're giving to businesses has changed a lot in that time, because options like switching and entering the retail market have become very limited in their usefulness. But the business case for a solar investment or an energy efficiency, productivity investment has started to look a lot more attractive. And so some of the some of the actions that are available to them can be accessed more readily as those circumstances change.
I haven't been this excited about batteries since I got a remote control car for Christmas when I was like 6, and now everyone's talking about them again.
Were they included?
No, but they were. They were rechargeable. So, we had the technology all along. Georgia, one thing that has become really clear in the last 3 years, and people have made this point over and over, but I think it bears repeating, there is no economy without people. Suddenly everything ground to a halt, and we had to try and find a way to get essential workers. Weirdly, journalists were included in essential workers. I don't think we should have been. But people who are driving buses, looking after sick people in a hospital, to keep them healthy and being able to work, and particularly aged care workers, who we suddenly found out because of economic insecurity were, unbeknownst to them, and because they needed to make payments on their, for their families, they had to work at multiple locations. And people on social media, I remember, were saying, well, why wouldn't you? That's so insensitive, that if you know that you might be sick or that you could get sick, you should just choose one location. I'm like, that just betrays how little people understand about this issue. So in terms of energy security and looking to the future, what is it that you're looking for in terms of protecting the most vulnerable people? I feel like I'm rambling now, but I feel like there's all these studies that show that the poorest people actually think they're a little bit richer than they actually are, but it's the people just above them who think they're being like really hard done by when really they're actually not the poorest. So I'm just wondering, in terms of protecting the people who genuinely need it and then asking everyone else to bear a little bit of that risk.
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, I think embedding consumer protections into any innovations is really important. But yeah, in terms of that kind of perception of people about their own situation, I think what you said before about being poor versus being broke is relevant. We have in Victoria the $250 power saving bonus. I think there have been 2 rounds and there's going to be another one. So that's $250 towards your energy. You can use it however you like. And I know VCOS wrote about this in the lead up to the Victorian election, that for some people, you know, the higher bills are annoying, but they can absorb that increased cost. But there are people who actually, like, they're already $2,000 in debt. So, I mean, the $250 isn't really going to make that much of a dent in that. So I think a more targeted approach to addressing, you know, inequality and inequity in terms of energy is needed, rather than just, I mean, I can see why they would give everyone $250 in the lead up to an election. But yeah, I think...
My sweet, sweet autumn child.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, this probably is not, it's a bit off topic, but I think in my work, a lot of the time the elephant in the room is that there is a cohort of people who will never be able to pay for their consumption. And I'd love to see some innovation that deals with that, because it's
people living beyond their means, or
because they're living on Centrelink and they might have a big family and their house is inefficient, and
we have below poverty line payments in this
exactly,
country.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not just for the energy sector to fix, but I think that question often gets answered in forums that I go to, and there's never a good answer. Like, no one's got the answer. So I think, that's something that I hope we can address, because, if you can't pay the bill, you know, you might be able to engage with the retailer to keep the energy on, but the debt just keeps growing and becomes, you know, it's a psychological burden as well as a real financial pressure. So, yeah.
It steals time from you
Yeah.
when you've got these things to worry about. And Dal, I'm just interested in, I know you're representing irrigators and whatnot, but as a personal, I don't know if you own your own home, but I'm just going to assume that you do. But I just bought a home, and I realised for the first time after renting my entire life that I could get a battery if I wanted to. It's got solar panels, I could put more on it. But you know what? I'm not lazy, but I just don't want to think about admin. And so, like, I know that makes me sound like a terrible person, but I'm just like, I don't want to think about it. And so I just haven't really got around to sorting out whether I can do things to the house that make it more energy efficient, and things like that. Are you that kind of person? Are you a doer?
I was about to give you the name and address of a bloke that can help you with
Oh,
it.
Is it my accountant?
And that's one thing that I will say about farmers is that they're fairly innovative. When we started this process, we had 2 work streams. One was to go to the government and say, listen, you pack of people, we need power cheaper. That didn't really work. The second thing that we did was we thought, we mightn't be all that productive with power ourselves. So we had some clever people working for us. We sent them away, got them trained in energy audits. We got them trained in energy audits with an agronomic background. And then we started to look at variable speed drives. If we invest this, we can do that, and we're actually getting more production. The third work stream was that if we can't get power price below 16 cents, we're going to have to go off grid. So how do we go off grid? Well, solar's great. We did the first trial with solar and it worked really good through the day, not so much through the night. So we actually, and I'm relayed this story at the last Foresighting conference, we found a piece of kit that blends power. And now it blends power from the grid and solar, it blends power from diesel and solar, it blends power from gas and solar. So all you need is something to keep it going at night, whether that's grid, gas, diesel or whatever.
Bundaberg rum.
And we proved that we could actually go off grid. Strangely enough, that system generates itself at around about 9 cents a kilowatt, and that includes the capital cost of the kit that's behind it. So with batteries, that's another thing. Networks are having all sorts of problems with too much solar through the day. Solution's a solar soak tariff, and get people that can use that solar through the day to use it, or put it in batteries. And I actually see a reasonable future in some of that kit for irrigated farms. And remembering that way back when we first started this, we were a cornered demographic. We were too big to put solar on because it wasn't big enough to drive our pumps, but we were too small to go into the really big stuff that the big boys were doing. So we were at the mercy of the grid. So our fourth work stream was to actually work with retailers to access and optimise network tariffs, and we've been able to do that with a company called Q Energy. They've done extremely well by us in Bundaberg.
Yeah, that's great. We're just about out of time, but I just wanted to quickly, 1 word, 10-second answers from everyone on the panel. I'll start with you, Simon. What are we, just because I want to help you out, what are we missing in this discussion so far, or what has been something that's been kind of risen up today that you thought we should have spent more time on? Shush.
What does Siri think
Not
we
you.
haven't said enough?
You know what? She's not ChatGPT. She's not that helpful.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that is part of the question, right? Is I did get the feeling that a lot of the futures that were talked about, particularly in the session after lunch, were quite modest in terms of what the potential change that's coming could encompass.
Don't know what we don't know.
We don't know what we don't know. Had we been doing this exercise in 1993, would we have had any idea at all of what we would be looking at in 2023? And so, yeah, I worry about our ability to project the same things forward. We just end up with things that look a lot like today, but a bit warmer.
That's the worst science fiction writer. Doesn't quite imagine the future very well. Rebecca, just quickly, is there something that's glaringly obvious that we're not talking about or that came up today that we can spend some more time on tomorrow?
It's 4:30. My 5 maybe.
It's 5, yeah.
5. Yeah, my brain's gone to muddle. So not particularly. I think to build on Simon's point, yeah, just about the ambition about what we're trying to achieve, and in a lot of the future visioning scenarios, it seems like capitalism still exists. So it's just like what can we actually do? And I really liked the island slide where you took away the island, right? And then you moved outside of your little silo, and then you're like, oh, there's health implications, because remember, energy is an essential service, and we can lean in and put pressure on to get minimum energy efficiency standards in rentals, because that's a huge protective factor that could improve affordability, health, all these other things. It's kind of like a no-brainer. And so I think thinking bigger outside of the sector and connecting through that way.
Looking beyond. And Georgia, I know, look, we've got cocktails coming up, so you can bear with me for 30 seconds. Georgia, what are we missing? What's standing out to you as a potential kind of focus point?
I just think remembering that energy is or should be a right rather than a privilege or a service that only some people can access. So, yeah, I think that I'll keep it brief.
Oh, look at you go! I love you. You're my favourite. Dale, what do you
guess,
reckon?
and I'll support that because the role of grid supply electricity is to provide comfortable homes and competitive businesses. So, if you concentrate on that, the rest follows.
Give me energy or give me death. We're going to do cocktail networking. There's going to be sunrises and siestas available for everyone. Thank you so much for bearing with me particularly. I've got a lot of Catholic shame. I bear it well. Tomorrow is a new day, so enjoy.